But I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about right now at the beginning. So I reckon that we can jump right into the review. The review of Bird Box. And what a movie. I was very interested in seeing that movie. Mainly because of how much of a cultural sensation it was back in... When was it released? 2018. 2018. Back in 2018 it was quite a phenomenon. There was this Bird Box challenge where stupid YouTubers attempted to do crazy stunts. Hello mate, trying to get over that Czechs couldn't hold on to their lead over Croatia. Oh my god, yes, the game is going on as I stream, which is a little unfortunate because I do like to follow or is it going? I don't know. I'm not really watching football anymore. But yeah, thanks for keeping me informed. How did the game end? I didn't get a chance to watch it actually. But yeah, as I was saying, the whole movie had this kind of aura of a cultural phenomenon that I was really interested in going into this. And usually, like when movies are so popular that they become like so widespread, it doesn't really like make me want to watch them every time, because cultural phenomena isn't really something that is a good indication of a great movie, unfortunately. So I wasn't really into that, but I decided that for the stream I would watch it and let you guys know what I think. It finished 1-1. Well, I mean, Czech Republic against Croatia, like, to finish 1-1, that's almost a win for us. Croatia is a very difficult opponent, so I'm not mad about that. But yes, we are talking about movies, not football. And this particular movie, as I said, was made in 2018. If you don't know what it is, it's essentially an American post-apocalyptic horror thriller film that was directed by Susanne Bier, which is, Peter, if you're still listening, probably interesting to you because she is a well-renowned Danish filmmaker, Danish director, in fact, that made such movies such as Brille. I hope I have the correct Danish pronunciation there. Brille means brothers. It was made in 2014, which is a Danish crime film, and also made After the Wedding, which is a Danish-Swedish film. And, as a result of that being very successful, she was offered to work on the Netflix productions Bird Box that became wildly popular. The film was written by none other than Eric Heiserer. I don't know if you guys know him, but he wrote movies such as Arrival, Nightmare on Elm Street, Lights Out, and Final Destination 5. Which, I mean... No horror, of course. Good. Which, I mean, Eric Heiser, like, this kind of portfolio is, in a way, wide. It's a lot of, like, very well-known movies that, were received by a large portion of people very well. But at the same time, they aren't very, like, I wouldn't say they are of the highest quality. I didn't particularly like Arrival. Nightmare on Elm Street, I meant the remake, by the way, the 2010 remake, which wasn't that well critically received. I didn't mean the actual original. And Final Destination 5 is more or less, if we're being honest with each other, a B kind of horror movie. A B film B horror film of the B tier, that's what I meant to say. But this movie is definitely not B tier. And you can only look at the cast and immediately realize that is not the case. Of course, we have Sandra Bullock, that you can see on the picture right now, playing the main character of Mallory. And then we have Trevant Rhodes, very good actor, playing Tom, who is essentially her lover. By the way, I didn't say it, but spoiler warning, obviously. I think it's in the tags and in the title, but I will be spoiling the movie as I review it. Then there is John Malkovich, of all people, very good actor, and Danielle MacDonald, and one of my favorite actresses of all time, Sarah Paulson. She's very much my favorite due to her work on American Horror Story that I appreciate her for a lot. Also worth mentioning, this movie is based on a novel that was written by Josh Malerman, and the novel's called Bird Box as well. And I think that is an interesting thing to keep in mind, because the movie, like the premise, is great, in my opinion, or rather, like it's a good idea. But does the dialogue and what the filmmakers and the writers themselves, or rather the writer, have to come up with themselves hold up? That's the question that we'll be answering today. But I think we can jump from the short introduction in what the movie essentially is. Obviously, whenever you have a question, you can raise it. I am here to answer your questions and have any kind of discussions that you would like to have. But we're moving away from the introductory, or rather general information section, to the analysis of the movie that I was writing in a large part while I was watching. And the first thing that hit me, that always hits me, is the introduction. You have probably the largest amount of focus because you just sat down rather and started watching this movie, right? So you're focusing on what you actually decided to watch at most. And the introduction is good. If you have seen the movie and don't particularly remember the introduction, it was of essentially from the later timeline, because there are two timelines in this movie. The later timeline where Sandra Bullock, or rather Mallory, is kind of yelling at the two kids that we have to stick together, do not remove your blindfolds at any cost, or you will die. She's very harsh with them. And this harshness, although later in the movie is kind of gratuitous at some points, at this point it brings you in to the movie and into the thrill quite well, which, obviously heightens the tension and heightens your focus on like, why is this actually happening? Which is a very good way to like kind of introduce you and get you into the movie themselves. And it also underscores that we are living in a post-apocalyptic world in a way, because this kind of urgency and threat, of death to little children by a protagonist, it shows in a way that it is executed that we are not probably living in the easiest of times. There was very little to no subtlety in the beginning, and for the rest of the movie, in fact. And it is very, very direct. We're jumping right into an unknown world, with the children being led to a boat, blindfolded, and Mallory, the protagonist, is also blindfolded and is leading them to the boat. So you are immediately in this unknown world. You don't know why they're blindfolded. You don't know what's going on, and we are off. And they are rather off on the boat traveling down the river. Now, that happens. You're introduced into the movie. The filmmakers say, okay, I think we've got them. And then we go 5 years back, right? And I'm looking at it like, okay, I'm looking forward to learning about the blindfolding. Well, you surely will. I will explain it to you. Don't worry. So with the jump to the earlier timeline, which is basically the main point of this whole movie, the jump between the later timeline and the earlier timeline, rather 5 years before and present day. What this accomplishes at the beginning, I'm not quite sure, other than establishing how everything happened. And this has been done and overdone all the time by post-apocalyptic movies, and I'm honestly kind of bored of it. Like, when a movie can explain what happened, or rather mention, or rather imply what happened and how this happened through what's going on in the world, rather than this like easy exposition, it obviously makes it for a more interesting and entertaining watching, because other than focusing on what's going on, you are also trying to figure out the mystery of how all of this happened. How did we get here? And the movie basically spoon feeds it to you. Some people like it. I'm not so sure about it, to be quite honest, because now we're just moving to Mallory and her sister, Sarah Paulson, being in her apartment where Mallory is drawing some drawing of people. Okay, now we're moving to the drawing. That's why I got staggered here a little bit, because the drawing, that's something that was the first indication to me that this movie is probably not that well written. She is drawing a picture of people sitting on by a long table that looks very much like the Last Supper, and all of these people look lonely, and they're just sitting there kind of lonely, even though they're together. They're all looking different directions and stuff. And her sister remarks on it, oh, why are these people so lonely? Mallory explains, they're not that lonely, but they have rather trouble communicating with other people. And then it's heavily implied that Mallory is essentially drawing her feelings about people, and it's so pushed down our throat that it's that I kind of start feeling like either the writers think I'm stupid or they can't write subtlety to save their life. Then we have the classic unimaginable exposition through news of what's actually going on, that's overplayed both when they're in the apartment and then later on when actually the mayhem happens, when the news is actually saying, oh, there's this huge epidemic in Europe where people are starting to commit mass suicide, but nobody knows where it comes from. The doctors somehow already determined that it's not viral, and there's no pathogens, that there's no disease, even though it's just happened. So the exposition through news is not only lazy, but it also gives us a bit more information that would be available realistically, because right after people are starting to die and commit suicide, the doctors are immediately like, yep, this is no disease, we don't know what's going on, for sure no disease, even though investigations like that I imagine would take far longer to actually determine what was going on. So that was lazy, the exposition through news. I didn't like that at all. And the whole scene just dragged on of the two sisters in the apartment that was so heavy on exposition that it didn't allow you to immerse yourself in this very classic, very huge mistake that movies tend to go into, which is just explaining through the dialogue what the story is. It's not show, don't tell. It's literally tell everyone everything in a dialogue that's so unnatural that you can never believe that two people would actually have that conversation in real life. I even have a quote here. "We have to get you out of this house that you never leave." She literally said, "We have to get you out of this house that you never leave," the sister said to Mallory. While she's painting pictures of people that are lonely and can't connect with others. So movies have symbolism and subtleties for a reason, because a real world has subtleties that you need to look for and understand. We don't just give exposition to our character and our story whenever we enter a bar or go for a visit with friends, or our sister visits us in an apartment. It allows you to immerse yourself. It shows the depth of the movie, or how much you have to focus on what's actually going on in that. Do we learn anything else about the mass suicide? Yes. I might as well say it now, just so everybody is on the main on the same page. Yes, the suicides are actually what is the driving factor of the whole movie. So if you haven't seen the movie, what happens in Bird Box is that everybody has to cover their eyes, because when they open their eyes outside and see, they get to notice like some kind of a creature that makes them want to commit suicide, right? So that's the main plot point of why everything is going on. There are creatures among us suddenly that if you witness, you will either commit suicide, or if you are mentally unstable, you will want to like harm other people. And that's another huge issue that I'll get into later, but that's essentially the whole point. That's why they always have blindfolds and can't really look unless they're inside a house, because otherwise they witness a creature, and that creature makes them want to kill themselves, make them go completely psychotic. But let's not go too far forward. That is before this kind of apocalypse reaches the American shore, at least. But it's pretty much the same day when these sisters finally leave that apartment, and the whole prolonged scene of exposition and poor writing actually ends, and they go and visit the doctor, the gynecologist of Mallory, as we learn that Mallory is actually pregnant. And that conversation was even worse. And I felt so sorry at that point, because both Bullock and Paulson were playing it so well. They're such great actresses, Sandra Bullock and Sarah Paulson, that you know, like they really almost turned this shit writing into gold, purely by like how well this was acted and directed as well. The writing was just horrendous. But anyway, at the gynecologist, what happened was they had this kind of weird, quippy conversation. I don't know. Oh yeah, doctor, don't you know that talking about something makes it go away? Says Sarah Paulson sarcastically to the doctor, as Mallory refuses to talk about her pregnancy because she's scared of it. And the doctor is like, oh, I had no idea. You know, so this cringy kind of dialogue that I just illustrated is what I had so much issue with. And the complete unimaginativeness of the writers when it comes to like real life conversations is really like really poor writing when it comes to the dialogue, at least like here in the beginning. So that was quite disappointing. I even wrote a note. I lost trust in the movie's writing at 7:50. So that at that point I was a lot more skeptical going into this, and I might preface this as well that I was a lot more skeptical. The movie didn't end up as bad as I thought it would be, but you know, we'll get into that later. But it definitely wasn't anywhere near as good as I kind of thought it would be, because it was such a phenomenon, of course, in 2018. But then I kind of forgot about this bad writing a little bit, because after they leave the gynecologist, all hell breaks loose. Everybody starts crashing their cars around them. People are starting to jump off buildings, and everybody's trying to commit suicide. So there's a massive pandemonium. Everything's going down. And there is a very interesting line of dialogue when... I forget what exactly the conversation was about, but when they're trying to escape this mayhem, Mallory is kind of concerned about her other appointments, and Sarah Paulson kind of screams at her that like you would really want to focus on that right now, and she says, I find it kind of comforting focusing on the wrong thing right now. It felt almost like a rare gem in kind of the writing that is this movie. I liked, like, from time to time there were like quips and pieces of dialogue that I don't know if the writer stole from somewhere, or if there were actually two writers writing this movie, but only one was listed, and occasionally the good writer managed to convince the other writer that, you know, we really should put that in. But yes, so what happens there is when Mallory is trying to reach for something at the back seat, her sister actually witnesses one of the demons that are, by the way, never shown throughout the whole movie, which I think is good. Especially because later the concept art for the creatures was leaked and they look absolutely laughable and ridiculous. So it's good that they didn't show them and makes it more of a mystery. But yes, so her sister, played by Sarah Paulson, actually sees something, and since she sees the creature, she's immediately suicidal and tries to drive the car off the road, which she eventually manages. The car flips over when they're in like a suburban area, or not a suburban area, more like a city, actually, a downtown city in America. And when they get out of the car, Sarah Paulson actually manages to, stand up. She's still psychotic after seeing that creature, and she just walks in front of a truck that hits her and kills her deliberately. By the way, walks into the truck because she is psychotic. She is then helped into a house of some strangers, where large part of the movie will take place when they find shelter in that house. But we did not yet escape the swaths of bad writing, if you will, because immediately upon entering, people are obviously trying to make sense of the situation in this very classic post-apocalyptic kind of dialogue, like, oh my god, we're in deep shit, what's going on? Turn on the news, and again, the news explains everything. People are committing mass suicides, like people are getting psychotic, blah blah blah. I'm pretty sure that the news even said, like, if you look at if you look at something, at some creatures or something like that, then you are driven to psychosis and committing suicide. So we get immediate exposition, immediately what's going on. Everything that I explained to you right now is shown to you right away. There's no way of figuring anything out. People start blocking out the windows, panicking slightly, and then we have one of the characters, which you right now can see in the middle of the screen, or middle of the picture on the screen, who's played by, oh, what's his name? I forget. Well, it doesn't matter. The one in the middle, who happens to be a novelist, and immediately starts talking about, this is the end game, lots of mythologies in like Europe, like Celtic mythologies and like Greek mythologies always had these demons that if you look at them, you try to commit suicide, and that's the end of the world. And I was like hearing this, like, oh my fucking god. Are we seriously going to just like take the mythology angle again? Like, is it again some kind of mythological story? I feel like every kind of apocalypse has to have this kind of mythology angle to it, or aliens or something like that. It's it's kind of cheapening it, and we, by the way, never got back to that point. There's just this one dude that said, I'm writing a novel about this, which is obviously a massive coincidence as well. There are these demons that if you look at them, you just die. And it's in all these mythologies, and it's what's happening right now, and it's the end game. And everybody's like, shut up. I was also kind of like, shut up. And we never get back to that ever again. So, we are continuing with a pattern of kind of trying to push something into the narrative, some kind of piece of writing that is just not that great. And, honestly, I could have done without. So, yeah, that was kind of weak. And then there is, what is his name? Travis, I think, played by Machine Gun Kelly, by the way, very interestingly. Says that he's seen these monsters fuck with the nervous system of his clients for weeks, which is another interesting point because of what we knew so far from the beginning of the movie all the way up to this point, which is in about the 10th to 12th minute of the movie. But what we also know for the rest of the movie is that people commit suicide immediately upon coming to contact with these creatures or demons or whatever. But Machine Gun Kelly here just again throws out this completely weird claim that is also never focused on or never elaborated upon, that he has seen how the demons fuck with the nervous system of his clients for weeks. How is that possible? Is there some kind of like demon babies that only like fuck with you a little bit but don't have the power to completely get you over the edge? And if so, like, were the big guy demons starting in Europe and only then came to America to join these baby demons or whatever? I don't know. Like, they there are so many questions, and like the movie answers so many questions, most of which, or not most of which, but many of which I didn't care about, but also leaves many questions completely unanswered. This is just one of them. And that's what you get when you're trying, because that's, I believe, what the writers were trying, when you're trying to make this more understandable for people. As in, like, okay, now I understand that these creatures are fucking with the people's brains, right? But you also just throw out this completely weird, basically an irresponsible claim of, like, these creatures have been fucking with some people for weeks. And you immediately ask, like, so how does it work, you know? So you answer some question, somewhat, but you also, like, immediately start up so many other questions that I feel were more important than the first one. Like, where do these creatures come from, for example? How do they work? Yeah. So it was a poor attempt, essentially, to give us some understanding of what's going on. That's what I meant to say with that little rant. But after that kind of introduction and everything calms down in the house, we are going back to the later timeline, or rather the present day timeline, and we see that Mallory is actually paddling the boat with her blindfold on, and the children are also blindfolded, obviously as to not witness the demons. But then I was thinking, like, how does she steer the boat? Because yes, the river is quite wide, but like, I don't know if you ever tried to paddle a boat while blindfolded, but you usually favor your dominant hand and you start turning, unless you really focus on the direction. And, you know, if you've never done any paddling before, it's very hard, even with open eyes, to keep the direction of the boat steady. So blindfolded, that is, you know, not easy at all. And also at times they only seem to drift on the river and always in the right direction, even when she's not paddling. And then I completely don't understand how the boat is staying steady. That is just weird, because the boat, very often the currents just push things to the side. You know, so that was a little weird. But then we were introduced to a completely new concept in the movie that I think complicates things even further, and that is a person without a blindfold, that I talked about before. A person without a blindfold attacking the boat. And this person first tried to be kind of like sneaky, like, hey, you know, like, I'm gonna help you, just, you know, look at me, I'm over here. And they're like, no, don't take off the blindfold. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then this guy just attacked them, while and Mallory managed to fight him off. Immediately raised questions like, how can this person like witness the demons but not be affected? That would be somewhat explained later on, but very unsatisfactorily. Is that a word? No, I used it, so now it's a word, I guess. But moving on, there are some light portions of this movie as well. It's not all bad. And one of the sequences that I really liked was when they realized in the house that they don't have enough supplies, enough food for everybody that's there. There are like 12 people, by the way, including Machine Gun Kelly. And they decide, you know, we have to go to the store. But how do we do that? And like, they decided that the best way was to drive a car which would have completely blacked out windows, and use the proximity sensors and the GPS you know, to go to the store. And that was kind of like a good idea. It was well executed because there's still tensions. You know, the proximity sensors actually managed to pick up the creatures when they were kind of surrounding them and anything. But at that point, I was starting to wonder, and that's another question that the film didn't answer, is how come these physical creatures that are so powerful that they can literally make people kill themselves, how come they cannot enter houses? Or, you know, stop a car, enter a car, open the door of a car, for instance. How does that, you know, how is that not in their repertoire? How come they're not physical beings? How come they can't take off the blindfold of people, for example, when they're wandering outside at the beginning of the movie and throughout? How come these creatures can just, you know, walk around and like flip their blindfold and look at them, and then, you know, it's immediately done? You know, if they were able to do that, then, you know, why are they not able to do that? That is my question. So that was weird. But the driving sequence was very interesting with the proximity sensors and trying to navigate with the GPS. And they finally reached the store, and there was another cringy moment that immediately sullied my good impression from the driving sequence and how well it was shot. Because there was the weirdest, probably the weirdest Trump joke I've ever heard in my life. And it was so weird and so like cringy that I only realized it was cringy after like a couple seconds where I actually, you know, processed what I've just seen. Essentially, this John Malkovich character is a bit of an asshole, but I think the movie wanted to underscore just how much of an asshole he is, I guess, by making him go to the liquor aisle in the store and starting to drink immediately and getting drunk immediately, by the way, and then yelling out to everyone once they congregated into that aisle. Because he wanted to tell them something. He said, and I quote, he wanted to let's make the apocalypse great again. And everybody was like rolling their eyes, and then there was a detail on the two black people in that movie that were feeling like awkward, and they were like, you know, this is fucking weird. And I was looking at it like, what the fuck is this? Like, why did you put this here? This is so fucking weird. And I feel like literally the only reason was to make people want to like hate on John Malkovich's character more. And like that is it, and make a little comic relief joke that was just completely not fitting at all. Just so weird. So weird. Like, what is his name again? Eric Heiserer. Like, I don't know what the fuck is going on with that, honestly. So weird. Okay. Then, what happens later, when they actually manage to get back into the house with all the supplies. Another thing that I found weird was, not weird, but like rather interesting. This one is interesting. This one wasn't weird. Is that Lucy and Felix just decided to abandon everyone. They took like some of the supplies and they took the car and they just drove off. And it was just kind of like, would that happen in real life? Because the thing is, right, these people hooked up. So I guess they kind of have like started having some kind of like relationship, but they only met a couple of days ago. And they had this collective of people that already went through some shit together. And they decide to abandon everyone because why? Because there are two pregnant ladies, or because they're unsure, like with the John Malkovich character being an asshole? Like, what was the point of them leaving? I didn't quite get that. But they did. Lucy and Felix just left, the youngest people there. Apart from the unborn children, I guess. But then we move again to to the first to the late timeline, and we are treated to a scene of a capsizing where, you know, we are shown like some of the issues with paddling a boat while blindfolded, where they actually hit a truck that's like half submerged into the river, with some current as well. So the boat capsizes, the children fall out, but they are both caught by Mallory, thankfully. That was kind of strange that she managed to like gather both of them after capsizing so quickly, even in a current, and blindfolded, by the way. So that was quite strange, but it was executed very well and very interestingly, because you have this shot. It's not a long shot, but like you see what's gonna happen, because the boat is heading for the half submerged truck, so we know that there's gonna be some issue. But the tension isn't maximized by the characters' reactions, because they can't react, because they can't see it. So I kind of like that, and it was kind of like realistically executed. I actually believed the boat capsized and the children actually fell into the river. So I don't know how they did that, but that was quite interesting. But after this capsizing, there was another interesting scene where they managed to actually climb onto the boat again, which was kind of strange. But they managed to hear wind chimes, and like it seems that this part of the movie, this sequence, was written by the guy that writes well, and instead of like the character saying something like, "Oh my God, I can hear wind chimes. That means there's a house nearby." There was just like the faintest sound of wind chimes, and Mallory immediately picking up on it and just asking, "Did you hear that?" And then there was immediately an edit to them like reaching land. So that was like, you know, well paced and well executed kind of movement towards this other goal, that it wasn't like immediately shown off in a very expositional and unsubtle way. So I like that. But then I started wondering about the weaknesses of the film again, because immediately upon entering an abandoned house, where the door to that house was slightly open, by the way, it wasn't shut, it wasn't like wide open, but it was like a half open door. Mallory like manages to find that door and like open it, get inside, and takes off her blindfold. And again, I started thinking, okay, so even with an open door, the demons cannot enter any house? Why? And if it is so, like, is it really like some kind of callback to like all the mythologies and, I don't know, like the myth about vampires not being able to enter anyone's house unless invited in? Because if so, then that's pretty fucking stupid. If that was their completely like random justification for doing that. So I didn't understand it. And here it is worth mentioning again that this is actually based on a book that I didn't read. But I very much subscribe to the idea that the movie has to stand on its own, whether it's part of some kind of cinematic universe, whether it's based on a comic, whether it's based on a book or a video game. The movie has to make sense on its own, and here it just doesn't make sense. I don't know if it makes sense in the movie, but in the novel, I guess. But here it's just completely glossed over. But then we get another major breakthrough in like the plot of the movie, as this guy knocks on the door of the house back in the earlier time frame when there's still many people in the house. Knocks on the door and tells everyone, I'm being hunted by these guys who want me to look on the creatures. and everybody's like what? How can these people not have blindfolds? And he explains because they are deranged people, like from the mental asylum, that and then they ran away. So immediately we are confronted with this idea, and it's kind of explained to us why the guy that attacked the boat earlier didn't wear any blindfold. That mentally ill people are, upon seeing the creatures, are driven to harm everyone else but themselves. And harm them, I mean, in a sense of removing their blindfold so they can see the creatures as well. Which is kind of weird, and like some people argued it's offensive. I don't know, honestly, like in a way, rather than being offensive, I think it's quite ignorant, because like the sheer idea that if you're mentally ill, you will have a completely reversed reaction to seeing the creatures, rather than being so sad and desperate that you drive yourself to commit suicide, that instead you become happy, because these people are, by the way, very jolly and happy and want everybody to see these creatures. Is just so strange and so simplistic, essentially viewing mentally ill people as like so desperate that their only way of reacting to seeing the demons is the exact opposite, almost making mentally ill people the opposite of like mentally kind of well people, if you know what I mean, right? So essentially, by saying that mentally ill people have completely opposite reactions, you're saying that they are on the spectrum of happiness, on the other side. And if that's so, which is super weird, like it just starts so many questions. Like, for example, like where is the line, right? Will a person with the borderline personality disorder, for example, which is just a disorder and not a mental illness, will they be affected the same like other mentally unstable people, and want to hunt down other humans and make them see? Or will it drive them to commit suicide because BPD isn't that severe compared to other mental illnesses? And how about major depressive disorder? How about people that suffer from major depressive disorder, which is much more or not much more, but it is viewed as more serious than borderline personality disorder. But at the same time, like the people that suffer from that do not exhibit signs of delusion, or like serious delusion of like reality, and any kind of what we would describe as insanity. So where's the line? How does this work? Will these people be affected in this way, or these people affected in other way? It's just strange why anything like that was thought into the movie, because I feel, and I mean, yes, it follows the novel, because in the novel this is somehow put in it as well. But like, why? You can just have the monsters. It's fine. You don't have to have people that are turned for some reason because they're mentally ill. Also, I wonder how the monsters/virus diagnose who is mentally ill. What manual are they using? That is a good question. Are they using the DSM-5, or is it the ICD? It is a very interesting pondering. Like, what is the decision? But I think like the movie would argue that it's not actually the creatures picking out who gets this reaction, but they're just maybe driven to look at everyone. And like some people would just have different reactions to seeing the creatures, I guess. But like, how? Based on what rules? That is just so weird. But then we are treated to another weird kind of, again, not weird, but I think I'm using the word weird too much. But we are driven to like a poor attempt to keep the plot moving forward by this conversation between Mallory and the other pregnant lady whose name is Olympia. That's part of all the people in the house, and she asks Mallory, "Can you take care of my child if something happens to me?" Which, you know, immediately, because we know about the other timeline, we understand, okay, so Olympia is gonna die and her child is going to be taken care of by Mallory 5 years from now. So, okay, so now it's explained. I don't know, it had to be explained in this scene, but the filmmakers sure did, because the scene is just so strange, again, in the way how it's conceived in a completely, or conceptualized in this completely unnatural conversation where these two ladies that didn't really talk to each other that much have this moment where Olympia just completely opens up to her, to Mallory, saying that she's like really soft and she's been spoiled by everybody loving her entire life, sorry. But Mallory is so like hard, you know, and Mallory says, "Oh, you know, I was raised by wolves, you wouldn't like that." And then Olympia tells her, "Well, you know, I think that you should take care of my child if something happens to me." So that's, you know, that's just weird. It just came out of nowhere, and it feels like the filmmakers ran out of time on where to like fit in this explanation of why is Mallory taking care of the other child. And at this point, like, knowing the rest of the movie, right, it didn't have to be there, because so what happens later on, and, you know, spoiler alert, but we're not really reciting the whole plot here, so I'll just talk about this now. So what happens later on is that one of the guys that they let into the house happens to be one of the turned crazy people that is just unbelievably good at composing himself and not looking completely crazy like everybody else, and only waiting for when both the mothers go into labor at the same time to go completely bananas and start ripping off windows from the blinds from all the windows, so everybody can see outside, so everybody can, you know, be driven to kill themselves by looking at the demons. And then he also actually himself murders those that try to stop him, or attacks them rather. And like one of the casualties, or pretty much like this has pretty much all, like everybody in the house was a casualty of this one attack of this guy, including Olympia, right after giving birth to her child, which, by the way, took like 3 minutes. And what happened there was she was holding her baby, looked outside the window when the guy, when the guy whose name is Gary, or the character's name is Gary, but he's played by Hollander, Tom Hollander, I think. And so she sees, Olympia sees outside the window, presumably sees a creature, because her eyes immediately become like kind of bloodied, and she like goes towards the window with the baby, but Mallory stops her and takes the baby from her, and then Mallory just jumps out the window. Or not Mallory, Olympia, sorry. Olympia jumps out the window. And everybody else is dead, but Mallory and Tom, who's played by Trevant Rhodes, and they kind of already were becoming close through conversations and everything like that. So she has these two babies, and everybody else is dead, and only Mallory and Tom are alive. And obviously, if you have two babies, like, you don't just kill one of them, yeah? If you're not like completely psychopathic. So why did we have this scene where Mallory asks, "Take care of my child"? I'm pretty sure, or sorry, not Mallory, where Olympia asks, "Please take care of my child if something were to happen to me." By the way, only like 10 minutes in the movie, like the movie's runtime before this happened. Why did we have that scene? Because it, like, when like something would happen to her and like those children would remain with Mallory anyway, right? There was no point, and it was so forced for nothing, essentially. But at least the childbirth scene was a little bit interesting in a way that it was shot, I guess. I kind of liked the exposition of the whole like scene, because it was essentially double childbirth while classical music was playing. So that was kind of, you know, quite interesting from a cinematography point of view. And at the same time, this Gary was revealing to be completely crazy, putting out maps of, or not maps, drawings of the demons on the table while all of this was going on. So that was an interesting point. And the action sequence afterwards, where Gary goes on a rampage and tears down the blindfolds and attacks everybody that tries to stop him, was kind of interesting as well. But I feel like, I don't know, like, yeah, okay, let's not go too let's not go too like negative on this. The scene was good. Yeah, the scene itself, when it comes to like complete isolation, actually makes sense, I feel. One of the few. I don't know if you can tell yet, but I wasn't convinced by this movie. But then an interesting turn came around when we were treated to the present day timeline once again, which so far has been only essentially just the Mallory traveling with the two kids down the river. And it is like they stop, or no, they don't stop, but like she stops rowing on the boat while the boat stays steady still, and they go into this little tent so they can't see outside, and she has something to tell them. We were given a snippet of a shot where like they heard from a walkie-talkie that they managed to contact someone on like down river that told them, you know, we have a sanctuary, but you have to go through rapids to get there if you're traveling by river, and you can only get there by river. But the rapids are so dangerous that somebody has to look and tell the person steering the ship where to steer. So that was an interesting plot point, and that I immediately started paying attention to that, because essentially what you had here at this point, because Mallory is the only one strong enough to steer the boat and paddle the boat, what you had here at this point was a Sophie's Choice. You don't know about Sophie's Choice? It's, I don't feel bad spoiling this, because this is basically general knowledge. I won't talk about the story itself, but just what Sophie's Choice was. Because essentially she had to choose. It was like a story from the Auschwitz concentration camp, and Sophie was a mother who had to choose between her two children, which one would be sent to the gas chambers and which one to the labor camps. So we got set up for this Sophie's Choice, and we only got set up, which was quite interesting, and I actually liked that, because we were only introduced to this by the virtue of like one scene where they are in this tent, and we know that they have to go through these rapids, and Mallory explains to the children like what's going to have to happen, and her son immediately volunteers, you know, I will do it, I will look. And by the way, if you didn't get it, obviously it's extremely dangerous and highly likely that he will look at a demon and try to commit suicide. But Mallory immediately says, you know, I will choose. So sort of cutting him off. And then, like, we're going back to the 5 years ago timeline. But you start thinking, right? Because this Sophie's Choice isn't just, you know, a choice between two of your children. There are lots of different variables here. One of which is, for example, or the main one actually, is that one of these children, the boy, is actually Mallory's, while the girl is actually Olympia's. It's not her actual child, but she's taking care of her. Why can't Mallory look? You mean during the steering? Well, it's not particularly, or during the rapid section. It's not particularly explained in the movie, but I assume that it's because she's probably the only one strong enough to steer the paddle boat in the rapids. These children seem to be around the years 4 or 5, so them steering the boat while Mallory looks is kind of like improbable. And also at the same time, if she looked and tried to steer the boat at the same time, she would have to face the opposite direction, which is, not ideal for paddling. And I think the paddles aren't even built for that. And B, if she happened to see something, is to see the demon, she would, immediately commit suicide, and these children would be stranded on a boat, small children. So, I guess if she dies, or if she sees the demons, then it's all doomed. So I assumed that was it. I was wondering about it a little bit as well, but I felt satisfied with like the necessity of one of the children having to look. But that is only set up. It is not yet revealed what will actually happen, what decision she will make. And we are moving back to the previous timeline of like, but then like this timeline is already kind of moved forward because everybody in the house is all dead, and we are now like witnessing the kind of family life of the children being kind of grown up, and Mallory and Tom living together, and kind of their difference in parenting. But if the one looking commits suicide, it's the same result. No. Well, not really, because if Mallory, I assume, right, and this is just my assumption, it's not in the movie, so maybe like that's a bad thing because obviously it has the issues that you point out. But I assume like the way that it works is that if Mallory commits suicide, then the children are helpless, right? But if one of the children, this is pretty dark, but if one of the children commits suicide, Mallory can still help the other one survive and like get to the place. And I also think like you can't really steer and look at the same time. I feel like, I mean, maybe you could have, because you're when you're paddling on a normal paddle boat, you sit with your back to the front of the boat where the boat is heading, so you could like look over and then paddle. Like, would that be effective? I don't know. Like, I didn't question it as much as you did, probably. I'm wondering. Would it be impossible? Maybe it would be possible, like thinking about it. But yeah, but maybe then there's the argument like if she dies, then what will the children do by themselves? She has to take care of both of them. So like one of them has to take the sacrifice, because if the mother dies, then both the children most likely die, I feel like. Because, they can't take care of themselves yet. I understand, but she can just look over her shoulder. Yeah. Like, yeah, so technically it is probably possible then for her to look over her shoulder when as she paddles, exactly. But like if she maybe like the, like, again, like maybe this could have been better explained in the movie, but like my thinking is like if she looks and if she witnesses the demons and then she's psychotic and kills herself, like what will be of those two children going down the rapids, right? Because like remember, they're going down these dangerous rapids, which we will talk about later as well, because there's some bullshit going on there. But they're going down these rapids, and like she dies, she jumps off or whatever, and the kids are still in the rapids, so both of them will die anyway, right? If she dies, then both the children will probably die as well, realistically speaking. But again, that's just this decision. That's for you to ponder about. We will talk about what decision she made, which might be surprising too if you haven't seen the movie yet, King Kong Company. But now we're moving like to the previous kind of timeline with Tom and Mallory kind of taking care of the children with a very different attitude, that is quite integral to the movie as well. So again, Mallory, as described by Olympia, is quite hard, raised by wolves, and especially in this post-apocalyptic world, she assumed this very survivalist kind of attitude that is, I think, very well shown in a sequence or scene where Tom is telling them a story about like playing with other children and climbing mountains and everything like that to the children, but Mallory cuts him off and tells the children to go to sleep, and that is angry with Tom because, like, in her mind, he's tempting them with like stories of like children playing around, even though these children will never experience that, or so she thinks, because they're not allowed to look when they're outside. And she's kind of harsh with these children, and this harshness, finally we're talking about this big part of the movie, this harshness is kind of underscored by the children being called boy and girl. Mallory calls them boy and girl. That's their like kind of names. They don't have real names. And this is kind of a conflict between Mallory and Tom as well. When they're arguing about the story thing, Tom brings it up as well. Like, why are you calling them boy and girl? Like, and you have this interesting split in parenting between a parent that's purely survivalist about like survival versus a parent that's trying to give them some kind of hope or happiness, like living, like happy living, And he says the classic line, like, life is not about surviving, life is for the living. And it's a little like overused and stuff, but I think it still has a role to play, and I didn't feel like it didn't fit in this movie. Perhaps like if this angle was focused on a little more, it would be more interesting, rather than trying to like barely explain what's actually going on in the apocalypse, why is this happening, and in the process of that creating scenes that don't make sense, and furthering more and more questions as to the nature of the actual demons. But yes, so there's this split, but we are still treated to numerous scenes of them kind of living together, and then we finally find out what happened to Tom, which is him essentially sacrificing himself when we realize bosses of these mentally unstable people actually go around and harass like people that haven't seen the creatures yet, and they want to make Mallory, the children, and Tom see, but Tom stops them and shoots at them, and then his blindfold comes off and he dies as well. So that's why Mallory is now alone with the two children, going to this stronghold of sorts. But now this timeline is closed. That is it for this timeline, and we are moving to the present day timeline, and we're moving straight into the Mallory's/Sophie's choice of who is going to look at the paddle boat. And we can see again the boy volunteers, and she cuts him off like, no, I will decide. And then the girl that has a difficult, kind of like a fraught relationship with Mallory, probably exacerbated by the fact that she actually isn't her child, and her being very harsh like with both of them. But again, like, she's a girl, and takes it more hard, I assume. So she kind of volunteers as well, with like a trembling voice, quite well acted by the child actor, by the way. And it's this moment where it's actually like sad and tense, and it's probably like, up until the actual decision, this was probably like one of my favorite, if not the favorite scene of the whole movie, because you're like thinking, holy fuck, like she's going to decide like which child to essentially sacrifice, because it's very likely that they will witness a creature there all around. And I'm like thinking, like, okay, wow, this movie actually probably has some balls, you know. But then the decision is nobody's looking. Yeah? After all this jazz, after all this talking about everything, she gets flashes of Tom and gets flashes of Olympia, promising he'll take care of her child. And she decides, you know what? Nobody's looking. We're doing this blindfolded. And I'm like, okay. Like, my first decision, or my first reaction sort of, was like, this is a little bit of a cop out. At the same time, I was quite stressed about what's going to happen, so I did feel some kind of relief, but not as much as like a feeling of a cop out, because they presented this intense, insane, like Sophie's choice moment, and then they decide, nope, nothing, nobody's looking. And this raises so many questions. Like, is this a cop out by the movie? Would a mother do the same in this situation? Like, probably, I guess. So maybe it's okay because it's kind of realistic, because she was instructed by the people in the shelter that somebody has to look, but then confronted with the choice of the children, that she cannot make that choice. So, you know, she kind of risks it all and decides nobody to look. Nobody will look. But what happens is that they go down the rapids, and the boat almost immediately capsizes, and everybody's like in the actual rapids. The children, like Mallory is like barely staying alive, staying up above the stream. Everybody's blindfolded. Very heavy current, very heavy rapids. The boy manages to hold onto a rock in the rapids. Mallory manages to like get to him in the rapids, and then they manage to swim ashore where the girl is ringing on her little ring, like that they have in case they get separated. So these massive dangerous rapids capsize them, and little children in the rapids, and Mallory, who was barely able to stay alive, all blindfolded, everybody survived. And I mean, yes, the movie's supposed to be kind of, I guess, advertiser friendly, you would say, on the internet, or like PG-13 or PG-15, so they can't really do child murder. But like, come on, like, let's be realistic here, okay? These are children of about 4 to 5 that were in freezing water that is moving so rapidly, and they somehow survived. How did they learn to swim? How were they able to battle the current that would probably kill someone like me? Or like even like a very decent, I think I'm a pretty decent swimmer. Even an adult, you know, this is highly dangerous as an adult. So first they first the movie cops out from the decision, like, who's going to look. Like, then nobody looks, and let's do it blind, which obviously results in them capsizing. But everybody survives. It's fine. There's no consequences whatsoever. So from that point on, I felt like, okay, there's no consequences to anything. This movie isn't realistic. There are no real stakes. Nothing can happen now. Because the movie wasn't over. They still had some challenges to go through before reaching the sanctuary. But at that point, I knew that, like, I wasn't scared. I wasn't thrilled or anything, because I knew that after surviving the fucking rapids, right, the children, like, cannot die. So at that point, it didn't make any sense. But I started thinking about it a little more, and I came to the conclusion, like, not only was it okay for them to not look because they survived the fucking rapids? They could very easily either take the boat ashore and drag it along the shore through the rapid section and then get back on it, or, considering that their destination was right after the rapids, they could literally just take the boat to shore and walk the rest of the way easily, because they walked their way from the rapids to the actual sanctuary where they were headed, right? So they didn't even have to go through the rapids. By the way, just for a side note, I don't know if you guys like boat on rivers or whatever, but here in the Czech Republic we do boat on rivers. And this is exactly what we do. If there are very difficult rapids, it's like super easy to take your boat on shore and like walk the distance of the rapids and then get back on the boat again. That's like a regular thing that people do, okay? And despite that, they literally were walking distance, and they knew they were walking distance from the sanctuary after the rapids. There was no need for them to go there and have this prolonged Sophie's choice that amounted to nothing. No need for any of that. So not only was the tension of like what she's going to choose completely killed off by her not making any choice, but also the tension was not necessary in the first place, because there were much smarter ways to go around it, you know. And I was looking at the book. I don't actually have it, I didn't read it, but I didn't find any relation to this actual decision being in the book. But again, the movie should stand on its own, and it has to make sense on its own. If the filmmakers feel like something doesn't make sense, or something is just like not realistic enough, doesn't make sense in the wider picture or anything, they have the duty to change it, because it's their movie, right? But then we have a little bit of a nice moment, I presume. When they're walking to the sanctuary, they have to reach this forest, and they're kind of surrounded by the creatures, and they kind of whispering to them, and they're mimicking the noises of people they know. For example, Tom, who's yelling at the blindfolded Mallory, like take away your or take just look, take away your blindfold, essentially. And okay, so they're whispers or something, and they're kind of scared, and they're trying to rush it, even though the monsters are clearly not physical and somehow cannot harm them in any way. And in this rush, Mallory trips over and falls and like knocks herself out by falling. And she kind of rolls into a ditch of a sort. And then when she comes around, the children are gone. So, you know, she has to like yell out to them, and meanwhile the creatures are trying to coax them into taking off their blindfolds, and even mimicking Mallory, telling them to take off their blindfolds, which obviously makes them kind of like resistant, because they are unsure of what to do. But then finally, like, first, Mallory finds the boy, and then she yells out to girl, and like the boy says, you know, she's maybe not answering because she's afraid of you, which, okay, I kind of feel that, I kind of understand that from a perspective that, you know, she was very harsh with them, and she was perhaps even harsher with the girl, because she wasn't really her child. But she has this moment when she realizes, you know, these are actually like now pretty much my children, like both of them. So she apologizes, and she tells her how much she loves her and everything. And it's a little bit like, sure, it's very emotional, but I think like the way it was written, like it worked, and the girl eventually finds her way to her, and she hugs them both and has this kind of like moment, which is okay. Then they finally reach the sanctuary. They find out it's a blind school, or a school for the blind, rather. Sorry, and it is this beautiful place which has like an outdoor kind of terrace that is like covered with vines in like a little dome shape roof. So the creatures can't be seen, so it's safe. And there are so many children that are playing around, and like it's a little bit of it's a little bit like too sweet, maybe. It's a little bit too, how do I put this? Like a classic Hollywood happy ending. But it's kind of made like beautifully. I liked it. I felt a little emotional, a little bit, because again I witnessed a movie that wasn't written very well, so that kind of prevented me from getting actually emotional. But then of course, she has to. They have to like fuck it up somehow, and she meets Mallory, and the children meet her gynecologist or her birth doctor that she had that fucking super awkward conversation with at the beginning of the movie, in that terrible scene that was poorly written. She's somehow in that sanctuary as well, and that was like super bullshit. It was highly unlikely, and it served little to no purpose except for the doctor getting to ask her, like, oh my god, you have the children, and they had this conversation where Mallory wasn't so sure about like keeping her child, and the doctor even offered her, you can still go for adoption, you can let your children be or your child be adopted by someone. And the doctor is like, what are your names? And the boy and girl reply, my name is boy, my name is girl. And the doctor is kind of like a little weirded out. But Mallory then, since she had her realization of love, she says, no, your name is Tom, pointing to the boy named after her lover that took care of the children for, their entire lives. And you are Olympia, she tells to the girl, which is actually named after her mother. Which, okay, sure, and now you give them names. I didn't really see the purpose of them being nameless, other than to underscore the harsh nature of their mother, which again kind of feels like too strong, maybe, like not subtle enough. The whole movie is like not subtle at all. And such a brutal step was taken to ensure that we all know that this mother is harsh, has a harsh nature. But at the same time, there was a conversation between Olympia, like, movie time, like hour and 10, or like time frame of the movie, like an hour before that, where Olympia was saying, I want to name my children after a Disney princess, which isn't that important, but still, fuck you, Olympia. Your child is named Olympia, like you. Such a crazy name as well. Well, but that was it for the analysis, and now for the evaluation. You may have picked up slight hints throughout the analysis that I didn't actually enjoy this movie very much. Not giving names is both bizarre and impractical. Yes. Well, impractical I'm not so sure about, because there are no children around them for the entirety of their lives. So I guess, calling them boy and girl when nobody else around them is called boy and girl, and there's just Tom, and because they literally lived their entire lives just with Tom, Mallory, and then boy and girl. So I guess like it doesn't matter if it's practical or impractical, because those are literally for them the only names in existence. And it is bizarre, and it's, again, I figured that it was only to show that the mother is kind of disconnected, and is focusing on like survival, and therefore it makes her harsh, and maybe she doesn't even want to get too involved with the children. She just wants to give them the like highest chance of survival. She thinks about it maybe too analytically, focusing on their survival more than their happiness, and therefore she names them boy and girl, which is just so over the top, and as you say, like so bizarre that the movie would have to go so far as to not name them. But they are actually not named in the book as well, and the book itself was kind of it was well received. Some critics although said that since this was basically a novel, a debut for the author, some people said that some critics rather said that like in some cases, even in the book, like he kind of felt the classic need of authors that are debuting to kind of heighten the tensions maybe too much, and like make it a bit more harsh, which is exactly what I picked up on in this movie as well. So maybe it was kind of translated from the book. But again, you're filmmakers, make a good movie. That's the main thing. But at the end of the day, I will probably not watch it again. The writing wasn't great. Some parts, like the one I just described, were just a little too crazy, too like unrealistic, or too far-fetched in the writing sense. But the premise is good, and it has good moments, good kind of situations that like arise, and sometimes the dialogue, like it is capable of like staying together. Like it doesn't fall apart completely. It's just like the core of the movie makes sense, and it is actually also enjoyable. But it's just like the very major parts around the movie, around the core, that are so like unanswered, that remain so unanswered, and that just don't provide you with the kind of satisfaction that you would want from the movie, that I would describe it as like all right, kind of average. And whether or not you should watch it largely depends on if you like apocalyptic movies, because otherwise I wouldn't recommend it as a good movie, period. I would recommend it as like an interesting take on like an apocalyptic movie kind of genre. But yeah, as I said, great premise, great promise with the idea of, you know, something that you can't look at and people actually being blind, but it wavers in places due to the writing. Maybe the focus should have been shifted more on the mother's survivalist slash the essentially father's, Tom's, like happy living kind of approach. And maybe if it had like some focus and some theme or some motif that would hold the whole film together, it would actually be a good movie. But it doesn't, you know. It's all about this like survival, and it has so many cliches, like the news exposition. It has like very vague ideas of like, oh, these are creatures that come from mythology of all these places, said once in the movie. Or like, oh, I noticed that these demons fuck with my client's nervous system for weeks now. Like these irresponsible statements that half-heartedly try to explain some parts of what's going on, but only like completely contradict the actual narrative of the whole movie, and no theme or motive to tie everything together, makes it all waver. Then, of course, there are some questions that are obviously arised from something like that, because if you're focusing on the survival factor and the world rather than on themes and motifs of something and character development, like, and you focus on the world and what's actually happening on the surface level, then people will obviously focus on questions such as, can the creatures not attack in a way, in any way, but just coax people to look at them? Are they not physical beings? Can they not open doors? Can they not enter houses? Can they not, you know, take off your blindfold? And why? You know, also, like, why did the creatures appear in the first place? There's no explanation of how this happened. In lots of like post-apocalyptic or movies about disaster movies, or like movies about a form of apocalypse, end of the world, there is very often an explanation, like an environmentalist issue, or like, for example, if you've seen the movie Snowpiercer, it is explained, and no worries, this is not a spoiler, it is explained that the reason why the planet is like in a state of perpetual snow and winter, it's because the scientists try to like stop global warming, and instead they overcorrected it or something. There is an explanation. So there's no explanation where these creatures came from and why they're doing what they're doing. Oh wow, King Kong Company, you've reached 500 channel points already. I might have to put that up because very inopportune moment. I can't believe you've done this. Wait, where are my sunglasses? Wait a second. All right, dude. Yeah, this makes it better. This is good. This is good. Very interesting. Cheers, dude. Cheers, mate. But anyway, as I was saying, right? Why do these creatures appear? No explanation. Also, something that I didn't talk about for a very specific reason in this whole review is the actual bird box. It's almost like in the movie. In what movie? The whole movie is called this whole movie is called Bird Box, by the way, right? And the reason why it is because they carry around this like birds, because the birds go absolutely crazy when the creatures are around. And that's it, you know. First of all, like the creatures, as we established, can't harm you physically. You can only, like, they only harm you when you look at them. And once you look at them, or you know, you have your blindfold on all the time. So, like, you don't have to take care of like when like to take more care if the creatures are around, because you have your blindfold on throughout the day anyway. So, like, why do you need a warning system for that if they can't harm you in any other way? So that was stupid. Also, how do these creatures affect other animals? For example, birds can clearly look at them, but not other animals. Or can other animals look at them, for example? I'm curious. Yeah, we talked about like how it's problematic with the mentally ill people being being the ones that are actually kind of turned and attempt to harm the other people, the people that you know haven't looked on the creatures yet. So that's not explained at all. Obviously, it's also very similar to A Quiet Place. I mean, like, I don't know if you guys seen it. I won't spoil it for you. But A Quiet Place is a film that also has creatures that come from space, I believe, and the difference there, is when it comes to these creatures, is that these creatures can't see, but they can hear very well. So instead of you staying blindfolded, you need to stay quiet very, very often. And that is kind of like very similar if you think about it. There's also a pregnant lady in A Quiet Place. That's another similarity. You have all these different mechanisms like the bird box, but in Quiet Place is something else, obviously. So kind of similar to that. And yeah, I've spoken about Bird Box like not being really the actual box of birds not being completely like gratuitous in the movie. Essentially, like it's nice symbolism, I guess, and then it's in the novel as well. But I'm really curious, like, what purpose does it serve in the novel? Because does it also serve this purpose of not being there for any reason at all other than learning that the creatures are around you even though they don't pose any threat unless you look at them? It's just crazy. So overall, look, if you like apocalyptic movies, I guess, yeah, you could take a look at it. It's interesting in many ways. It has great actors, very interesting scenes that I described, and the premise is good, but the writing and just like things that just don't make sense in that world are so plentiful that I keep asking myself, why was this a cultural sensation? There. That is pretty much the end of the review. The main question for me, just like the main question last week, was Ex Machina. In Ex Machina, did Ava possess consciousness? In this review, the main question is, how was this a cultural phenomenon? How was this a cultural sensation? I don't know. I really don't know. There was this Bird Box challenge, which was like super stupid, of essentially just stupid YouTubers blindfolding themselves and driving. And there was so much talk about the movie in general. It's just, you know, it's strange that these movies, like, how do they garner so much attention, and how do they become so popular without being actually like of good quality? It's just so strange to me.